Hello, everyone. How's it going? Thank you all so much for being here. I have Catt with me from Asana, and today we are going to be talking about their new goals feature. So really quickly, I am Emily. I am the community manager for Design Lab, and again, welcome if you're just joining us. Today we have a really exciting presentation, also something I'm looking forward to because I just mentioned the Catt that Team Design Lab also uses this feature that they just launched. So we're really excited to kind of learn about the process that goes behind it. So really quickly, just some logistics. If you have joined us before or not, please say hello to the group in the chat. Say hello, share your LinkedIn, all that fun stuff. Yeah, give us all the reactions during the presentation. Let us know how we're doing. We have some polls set up just to kind of see, how many folks have been using Asana. If you are familiar with your company's goals, you'd be surprised. But these are just kind of some quick polls that we'd like for everyone to participate in. And if you do have questions about Asana or Design Lab, please pop them in the questions tab. And either myself or Leah, who's in the chat, also from Team Asana, will be popping in to answer questions that we can answer in the moment. And if there's anything we feel is worth saving to the end for Catt to answer, we will absolutely save those questions. But as of right now, I'm going to turn it over to Catt so she can introduce herself, and then we can get started with the presentation.
Amazing. Hello, everybody. It's really great to be with you, whether it's morning or evening or afternoon, wherever you are. I am a huge fan of Design Lab stuff. I've been involved a couple of times now, and I'm so happy I could participate in this way. So a little bit about me. I am a product designer who is leading the design of Asana Goals. I have been in UX design and product design at this point for over 10 years. Before working at Asana, I worked at Etsy. I've worked at SoundCloud, NASDAQ, and a handful of smaller startups. So companies of all sizes. And my main thing is that I love to move fast and see solutions come to life. But I also want to make sure that I'm moving thoughtfully because I care about doing no harm. So learning and doing quickly and thoughtfully. I am a cat of all trades, as I like to say. So in my spare time, I make games, I play DDR, which maybe you can kind of see a little bit in the background there. I have a mat, and I draw, I climb rocks. I love to do lots of things that are both creative and athletic. I also organize events with purpose. So historically, I've organized a variety of different events for the past 6 years. Specifically, I have been organizing an event called the Game Devs of Color Expo, and we are actually about to have our next one in September. So find out more information about that through the internet. I am here because I want to talk to y'all about product design specifically. And I just wanted to say that I love connecting with people and hearing stories, which is part of why I'm here today. So occasionally I will definitely be checking the chat. I love collaborating with other people and really just putting together the puzzle to understand what kinds of challenges people are having and how I can, contribute any energy to making their lives easier. I am a very goal-oriented person. At the end of the year, usually am writing my goals for the next year, trying to figure out what I want to do to be a better person, a better designer. And it's perfect that I am, of course, designing a goal management product at Asana, because while the product I design is for teams, the overlap is really, really important for what I do, being a purpose-driven human being. In terms of Asana's mission, our company is currently over 1,000 employees. We actually added 500 plus employees worldwide since we started working from home last year. And we specifically want to help humanity thrive by enabling the world's teams to work together effortlessly. So what that means is that we're building tools that are helping people communicate and coordinate their work, their goals, and overall tracking their progress toward what they want to get done over time. We are a very collaborative team, which is great for me, a collaborative human, and we're constantly growing, a lot across San Francisco and New York, for example, and right now we're hiring, so definitely check out our jobs page. Product is split into 3 pillars. One of those pillars is the one that I'm on, which is called Clarity. And their goal is to create clarity, surprising everyone, at every Zoom level by building features that ensure that teams have a clarity of purpose, they have a clarity of plan, and who's responsible for getting that work done. Adoption is another pillar that focuses more on helping teams get started in Asana so that they can essentially like ramp up and like get their work done in a way that matches the way that they want to work and to become more efficient over time. And hopefully they love the product and they stay. And then workflow is the last pillar, or it is the third pillar that I'm going to talk about today. There's no hierarchy. And it aims to save you steps essentially by making the process of getting work done more efficient, effective, and delightful. So as I mentioned, I'm on the clarity pillar, and the specific reason that I joined Asana was because of some research and learning that we did. And it helped us understand that the current goal management experience is absolutely chaotic, unfortunately, here. So Asana and a research firm called Census-Wide did a survey of over 6,000 knowledge workers. So that's people like us as designers, product folks, anyone who's working probably at a white collar job. And they studied people from Australia, Germany, Japan, the UK, and the United States to figure out how distributed work during COVID-19 actually impacted organizations. And they were mostly focused on folks' ability to set and communicate and like achieve company-wide goals. And what they found is that a ton of people have said that their company goals were changing during the panini, as some people like to call it. And a lot of people didn't feel like their company was effective at setting and communicating company goals. So like 16% of people were like, yeah, my company's doing great. Everybody else is struggling. And as a result, approximately a quarter of employees in the study, 26%, felt like they had a clear understanding of how the work that they were doing actually relates up to the company goal level. Additional research from Asana found that companies of pretty much every size are losing a lot of hours to this thing that we call work about work, which is time wasted on searching for information, switching between apps, holding status meetings, like a bunch of stuff that isn't actually like on the ground doing the thing that they were hired to do. And as companies grow, this work about work grows. So organizations of like 5,000 employees especially are just losing over half of their time every week to the concept of just coordinating and talking about the work and not actually doing it. So this is a real big challenge for a lot of companies, and we specifically wanted to work on solving it. We realized that work management tools just didn't have goals, and goal management tools didn't have work. So a lot of tools that you might use just don't have a way to actually talk about why you're doing the work. They're deeply focused on what the work is and when you need to do it and things like that. And that's great, but we know that creating motivation is super important. And you want to make sure that the work that you're doing is actually aligned to why you're there and what you're trying to do. So specifically in this case, Asana Goals was really focused on just making it possible to connect work to purpose. And we also thought that this would be a great competitive opportunity because we know that work management is a pretty competitive space. And we really want to become a platform that has lots of offerings and really thinks about work holistically. So really focusing on the connection between the different types of work and the types of people who are doing them and why they're actually doing that work. So I'm super excited about this. And this is actually the reason that I joined Asana, just like being able to connect work fully to the purpose. So we knew going in that combining goal management and work management was going to really help people to be the most successful they possibly could. And it would make coordination and alignment a lot easier for everybody. I joined Asana in January of 2020. It's wild to think that I have not been at Asana for even 2 years, but this feels like forever ago at this point. And what I'll say is that we actually had a very specific launch date. So we were hoping to launch by May, and this was a completely net new product. And the reason that we wanted to launch in May is because we had a date on which we were going to publicly announce some new features. We do 4 marketing moments per year, or like 4 announcements like this per year, and they are of varying sizes. And this was a real big one. So this date was very set in stone, and we were going to have an event to go along with it. So the normal Asana design process is a double diamond. If you haven't heard of the double diamond process, generally it involves diverging 2 times and then converging twice as well. So you diverge by doing a bunch of discovery research to understand what the problem is. You then define and converge on which problem you want to focus on solving. And then next you diverge on solutions, and then you converge on the solution that you actually want to ship to customers. But because we were actually building an entire new product, not just a singular feature, we had to do a bunch of tiny little compressed double diamonds within the bigger overarching double diamond of figuring out what the product was actually going to be. So this was absolutely a lot of fun, and also sometimes just like brain breaking in terms of like, how do we coordinate everything? And I am super excited to talk about exactly how this works. And yes, it was definite double diamond session, as somebody has commented in the chat. So through discovery research, what we were able to find out is some of what we learned from some surveys that I mentioned earlier, but essentially nobody is doing goal management confidently. The goals are super far away from the work right now, which makes sense because there aren't a lot of products that are actually connecting these things. And because people are setting their goals within spreadsheets, for example, or presentations, is where they usually document those kinds of things. Teams would often kick off their work and then not actually go back to reference those goals pretty much ever. And then over time, teams would start to actually prioritize work that was less important. And then because these teams aren't actually able to update their goals, the directors who are responsible for reporting this information up to the executive level don't actually have a way to know what's happening and how close or far people are to actually reaching their goals. And then you have ICs or individual contributors who just do not understand what they're working on or how it relates to the company goals they talked about before. And all of this results in a bunch of people forgetting what the purpose was. So that really, that really bummed, us out. And we were like also really invigorated and excited because we knew that we could make it better. So we defined a target audience based on the insights that we gathered during our discovery research. And we realized that the people feeling most of the pain were directors who were responsible for the objectives of multiple teams, or like organizational divisions, basically. So that could be like product, marketing, or design, for example. These are people who are probably managing either leads of teams or managers themselves. So they're really just relying on other people to be successful. And that puts them at a really challenging point where they cannot directly do the work, and they have to report the status of all of the work that is happening upward to make sure that everyone else at the VP level and above is informed. We also had a secondary target persona, which is the team lead, who is actually reporting the status of those goals to the director. So that director persona is relying on the team lead persona to actually succeed. And so it made a lot of sense for us to make sure that we're also paying attention to the team lead and how we can make them successful as well. And our target company had a series of cascading or connected goals that essentially ladder up from the team level to the C level, because this is what we view as the most important type of goal management structure, where you actually have that connection all the way down. And we view this as something that's really important within Asana, because we're really focused on creating transparency around the kind of work that people are doing. So ICs are often unmotivated, as I kind of alluded to, because they don't understand how the work that they're doing is connecting to the actual company's goals. And ultimately, we knew that if we were able to figure out something at the top, at that goal layer, that hopefully we could start connecting it all the way down to that daily work. What I did next is that I facilitated a multiple day design sprint to actually help us align on a user journey and come up with some concepts we could test. So you can see here that we had a lot of fun. And this was actually in January or February, I believe, of 2020. So we were able to get together physically in a room and just kind of like put up a ton of sticky notes. Everybody knows that designers love getting to do journey mapping and sticky noting and things like this. So this was a lot of fun and was approximately 2 days long. And during this time, we were able to actually talk about what our customers would think, say, and do at different points of the goal management process. And for a lot of us, this was actually quite an emotional experience. And we had a lot of fun just kind of recapping for those of us who had actually been at other companies and done goal management before, some of what we were feeling. And we could actually build a lot of understanding with the people that we were designing and building for. So this actually led to some really great ideas when we started to think about solutions and do some sketching. And these are examples of some of the output that we had. So we essentially wrote out a ton of solutions and then actually shifted over to illustrating based on some of the groupings that we made, what some potential solutions might be. And then from there, I was able to turn those sketches into actual mock-ups that we could test with users. So what we did next is we actually did a bunch of concept testing, and we were really, really focused on just putting, I think we probably put approximately like 20 ideas in front of folks and just really had them tell us essentially where we might meet customer expectations and where we could actually delight. And so because we were doing concept testing, what we wanted to focus on was trying to understand what we needed to include versus what we could decide not to include within the product, and what would be kind of an extra nice to have. And we ended up using something called the Kano method for this, where people would say, you know, I would like having this in the product. I would dislike having this in the product. If it weren't in the product, I would like that. I would dislike that. I would feel neutral. And that was able to help us build a matrix, as you can see here, where we essentially plotted everything and figured out what was required versus what we could kind of decide to pull in or not. And some things that were, of course, mandatory were things like assigning ownership of a goal, which, you know, is great to have that calibrating piece of information. And we really feel like this actually aligned a lot with Asana's overall methodology, where we think it's very important to have an owner for every task. So next, what we did based on the information is that we aligned on our scope and we ended up presenting it to leadership. So you can see here essentially that there are parts of Asana that already exist that we wanted to connect to. And then there were new areas that we were going to add to actually display information about these goals. And what we were able to align on at this time was that the customer expectations in terms of what an MVP would actually look like, a valuable product experience for them, was larger than what leadership thought when they actually initially hired the team. So the bare minimum was quite up there and we thought the bar was here, and just like customer expectations were up here. And so leadership was like, we need more time, we need more people to help. And the convenient thing, sad emoji, is that because COVID-19 happened, we actually were able to use this as a time to reassess and figure out both an amount of time that would just be more reasonable for the team, and then when we were going to have this event that was actually going to announce this product and some other things. So we basically learned from this that, you know, you have to account for the world around you when you're setting goals. And sometimes you do have to adapt and push back the timing for things. So we really embrace flexibility with this. And I am very proud of the team for, you know, being able to communicate what we needed, and for leadership for working with us on that. So from here, we were able to communicate the change, and we were able to move forward with a new timing. So at the same time, we were thinking about how to define success. And these are a couple of examples of ways that we were thinking about it. So firstly, adoption, which is, again, thinking about, are people actually going to start using this product? So we really focused a lot on thinking about our target company and trying to see if we could get that target to actually start using goals. And so for us, it wasn't actually going to be success to have one user or number of users. It was actually really about like companies and organizations and actually getting the entire organization to collaborate on goals. So I think that was a really interesting shift for me, because I'm very, very used to the world of, like active users, but not really this concept of like active companies. So that was cool for me as a data point. And then things like upgrades, like do people actually upgrade to continue paying for goals? How many goals are being created overall in the product, especially at the company level? Like, are we having domains with a certain number of goals, and how can we measure that over time? So I think we were just thinking a lot about ways to actually engage at the company level. And I found this to be really interesting. And we're always working on ways to better manage and think about the way that we define success. And something else that we wanted to consider success for this was actually completing what we call the pyramid of clarity, where we've got tasks, we've got projects that are made of tasks, we've got portfolios that can have different projects and portfolios in them. And those are all work-related concepts. And then you have the why now. And so if we could actually figure out a way to connect all of these things together and bring meaning to the work that people are doing, we knew that that would also long-term just make our products more clear and create a world in which we had healthier project delivery, and that would happen because of healthy goal management, essentially. And then what we did next is we were able to pull in an engineering team. So what we did next is that we got other teams that would help us occasionally, depending on the point of the work that we were at. We had some parallel tracks for design versus engineering. And so you can kind of see here, this was essentially, we had a bunch of planning documents that we were trying to work through. We would prioritize research questions based on what was needed to learn soonest to make decisions that would help engineering build quickly, while we could maybe, for example, have more time to actually scope out some of the more product and design heavy questions. So it was really interesting to think about the balance between having to kind of like essentially build the car while you're also kind of driving the car a little bit, and figure out, for example, where we could focus on gathering new insight versus like leaning on existing product insight, which was very possible for us because Asana has a lot of insight from past products that they've rolled out. So sometimes we could actually lean on that instead of spending a bunch of time doing new research. So I really found it to be a great learning exercise in terms of just figuring out how to prioritize insight gathering and where we could actually get that information from. Something else we had to think a lot about was the amount of value that something would provide versus the amount of effort it would take to actually build and to design that feature. So we had to sometimes cut scope because certain features were too expensive for the amount of value that it was providing. And we would really start by asking, like, what's the right thing for our customers, and like what will provide the best value, so that we can make sure we focus on definitely including that. And if anything is going to provide less value, let's consider, does that need to happen right now? So that was really helpful for the research that I was doing, for example. So you can kind of see here that I was doing some very, very low fidelity wireframing just to understand what that flow might look like. So for example, here you can see that you've got, like, on the left, you have this screen where somebody might see a list of goals and then they might click through. And we wanted to understand what information needed to be on that page when they clicked through, as well as on the list view, so that they can understand the status of their goal, for example, and the progress made toward that goal. So this helped us actually understand what people would need to see on the page. And then what I was able to do is to increase the fidelity of this experience over time. So once I got the general flow down, I was able to actually focus on interaction design exploration. So one thing I was thinking about, especially because I was a new designer to Asana, while I was also designing an entirely new product area, was actually figuring out how much to be consistent versus cohesive with the existing Asana product. So I was trying to figure out things like, do we need to use the peak view that I feel like Asana is pretty well known for, in terms of if you click on a task, the task information will kind of slide over and you can still see the name of that goal. That's the peak view. Do we need to do an overlay? Everybody loves modals, but is that the thing that's going to work for this space? And then we also thought about, for example, a full page experience. And what we realized is that we really wanted people, when they actually clicked on a goal, to actually focus on that singular goal, because we had a strong hypothesis based on what we learned through the research that we did, that the list view was really for that exploration. And then once you clicked on a goal, that meant you actually wanted to focus and learn more information about that specific goal. So that helped us decide in this case that the full page experience was the right interaction pattern to follow. And then next from there, I started to refine parts of the details page itself, for example, status and progress. So you can see on the left and in the middle, these are a ton of iterations that I did to figure out the experience on the right in terms of just understanding what kind of information we needed to display about the goal status and progress and the right way to communicate that information. For this, we actually did include some assumptions that were based on the existing Asana product and some of the earlier research that we had done, because Asana already has status and progress reporting in other parts of the product. So we could actually reference a lot of that and then take the insights we learned from our discovery research and figure out how to move forward. And so on the right are all of the different states that I ended up landing on for the actual experience in terms of that singular module on the goal details page. And then I also had to design onboarding and monetization. So this was actually a really fun situation because I was able to meet with a ton of people who work within the adoption space regularly. And we were able to jam together and actually figure out what questions users have in general when they are starting on Asana for the first time, and then what questions might have within goals specifically. And what is the right format that we can use to actually answer those questions? So Asana does have a design system, which made it really easy to get going, but it was also really helpful to just meet with the designers who work within this space regularly. And then from there, I was actually able to make some documentation that I could use, and then, that other people could use in terms of having a worksheet potentially to work from to actually figure out the right components to display if we want to answer certain questions for customers. So this was really valuable. And I actually ran a workshop with leadership based on that template that I made. And we were able to move really quickly toward a decision because we had that list of questions and we had a very clear map between the questions that we were asking and the way that we wanted to answer them in the product. And before we knew it, the whole product and the marketing experience was ready to go. So I had the benefit of actually collaborating with some marketing designers as well, actually sending them mock-ups of what the experience was going to look like as we were building it so that they could then kind of translate that to the actual live marketing page. So there was a lot of collaboration happening pretty much throughout the entire design process of this. And it was really amazing to see the whole thing come together. And then we launched this in July of last year. So it went live at the Future of Asana event. The early adoption was really good. We actually had some expectations that were set based on prior product launches. So we felt really good about the general trend that we saw. And we are essentially at this point, it's been over a year since we launched the product. So we've really just been learning. We are definitely working on improvements over time. We, for example, started with a product that didn't have a way to make private goals. And then we rolled that out within the span of about a month and a half. We've made it possible to make certain edits that weren't possible before. You can drag and drop your goals now. You can see the edit history of goals. We actually just also rolled out a way to group your goals by time periods and to actually see company goals versus team goals. We've just been iterating a ton and it's been a lot of fun. I actually spent some time working with the team after our launch on a 2 to 3 year vision. And that really, I think, also helped because once we had a vision, it was very easy for us to see what we wanted to do. And then we can actually prioritize the customer feedback against the vision of where we want the product to go. So highly recommended. Once you launch a product, make sure that you actually are also building a vision and not just listening to customer feedback by itself, because sometimes people don't know yet what they actually would want until they actually see it. From this launch, we learned a couple of things. So as I mentioned and alluded to earlier, consistency and cohesion are some things that sometimes you're, as a designer, going to have to figure out the balance between. For this product, we realized that sometimes if you're reusing components, people are going to have expectations that the components that you reuse work exactly the same way. And we actually have been iterating a lot on the experience of our goal objects and the way that they're presented in the product to make sure that they feel cohesive with the Asana product, but that people don't pull their expectations from other parts of Asana because of the way that the object itself looks. So we actually do want to make it something a little bit more distinct so that we can have it be a more inspiring object versus a task, for example, and a couple of other, we want to make sure that we're communicating the right expectations for people to have. Also, we realized that it's very important to make sure that the discovery research that you do informs the deadlines that you pick for projects, if you have deadlines. So in this case, we had a deadline because we had a marketing moment that we wanted to make sure that we were able to announce by. But make sure that you are informed by the research that you do. And then finally, something else we learned is that it is totally okay to not 100% understand your customers at first. We did discovery research, and that really, really helped us to make sure that we were moving in the right direction and that we were ultimately co-creating as much as we could with them. And then over time, as long as you've got a good starting point, you can continue to iterate and get feedback from them as often as possible to make sure that you get closer and closer to understanding where they're coming from and what they need. So I really like working on the goals team, and I've really enjoyed the past over a year and a half at this point working with them, because essentially it combines the two things that are like most common in my work experience, which is startups and large companies. I really love the fact that I'm basically at a startup within a larger company. It's super ambiguous work. We're learning all of the time. We are launching things all of the time. And I really feel glad to have been a part of this experience. Goal management is very unique. The personas that we have are very unique to Asana as well. And I've had a lot of fun advocating across the company and collaborating with other designers who have no idea what I'm doing. But then, they try it out, they learn about our customers, and they feel really excited to actually put goal management in other parts of the product. So we're really excited to essentially keep building, and we have a ton of support. So super proud of all the work that we've done thus far and excited to keep growing. And definitely come work with us, because there is actually a design position for my team. Finally, my advice to you, always be setting expectations and make sure to reprioritize as you learn. So that's something that I had to do a ton of on this project. I actually was sharing updates every 2 weeks to make sure that everybody knew what I was up to as I was designing, because if you're especially designing a huge, very ambiguous project, if you're not letting people know what your bandwidth is, it's going to be really challenging for them to understand where your time is going. And you might also find that if you're communicating with people, they can actually pull in help more. So I am really grateful that I was able to say, hey, I'm kind of in the yellow right now in terms of red, yellow, or green in terms of my progress and how I'm feeling about the status of my work. And when that would happen, my manager was able to say, oh, we can actually pull in this other person who can help with this piece of work because they know it and they're really familiar with it. So always set expectations, always be communicating, and make sure that you're consistently reprioritizing your work as you're learning, because that's going to help you be a better designer, especially when you're in situations where you have to move very, very quickly. And with that, thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions. I see that we've got some. You can also tweet me at Catt Small, and you can follow Asana Design Team for jobs and more. We sometimes post on a blog, and I'm really, again, happy that y'all had me as part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Catt. And from your presentation, we have a lot of thought-provoking questions, some that are related to the presentation, some that are a little bit more based on your experience, but we're going to go through them based on upvotes. So the first one is, do UX designers at Asana do both research, mainly interview the target users, and design? And there's another part to that, but we're going to answer that.
Great question. So we do have user researchers who are on our teams. we do a lot of, we kind of collaborate together essentially to make sure that designers are equipped with the information necessary to make sure that they are conducting research that is going to get the kind of results that they want. So I really love having a user research partner. We get to nerd out a lot of the time about like strategy in terms of like, how do we want to actually get insights from folks, and like, what's the right way to make sure that we're getting insights that are actually usable. I think especially when you're working on a project that is very deeply centered around behavioral insights, it's very important to make sure that you're doing the right kind of research to get the kind of data that you want. So that is a situation in which I am so thankful to have a person who, you know, like went to school specifically also for like research techniques and has a whole history of studying humans in a way that I don't, because I went to school for graphic design.
Got it. And I think the next question may be a little bit more of opinion/experience question. But what do you think of startups that separate the two? The UX designers only work on UX, but UX researchers and PMs conduct the interviews. Like, how do you feel about separating those?
Yeah, my preference is that I get to speak to people sometimes. I don't always have to be talking to customers, but I think that it is very important that we as designers have opportunities to interact directly with our customers, because otherwise it starts to feel kind of like you're in a zoo. And I already feel like over time I've been examining some of my like design research practice and like trying to think about ways to not be like paternalistic when it comes to creating experiences for customers. So I feel like we should definitely be like more closely connected to our customers as much as we can.
Yeah, and I feel like that truly just drives that whole concept of empathy, and like that drives our work, right? So really
Yeah.
just understanding the user and just kind of what they want. And sometimes it's about reading in between the lines. Like they may not be saying what they want, but it's kind of our job to like know what they want essentially.
100%.
All right, next question is, how do you concept test with 20-ish concepts? Are there user interviews, usability tests, a mix?
Yes.
What goes into that?
Yeah. So because of time, we actually, in this case, had to do a survey. And I feel like feelings about surveys are all over the place. And I feel the same way. I'm always like, don't do a survey if you can, or avoid it, you know? But for this case, we actually, because of time and like the type of questions that we were asking, it actually made a lot of sense, I think, for us to do a survey. Because essentially what we were doing is we would show people a picture, we would have a little description of like what the feature was, and it was very low fidelity. And then we would say, you know, yeah, how would you feel if this was included in the product? How would you feel if it was not included in the product? And it was like a range, you know? And so because we had our research partner designing this whole thing and she totally knows what she's doing, it just made a lot of sense. And like, I totally trusted her at that, like with that task. We also needed a huge amount of insights. Like we didn't need, you know, to just talk to like 15 people, because that wasn't going to be enough. So we actually needed to make sure that we had, you know, 100, more than 100, ideally, people actually giving us this kind of feedback, so that we knew at scale that it was probably believable. And then what we were able to do with those concepts is, as I mentioned before, like we then actually did some usability, like more qualitative interviews with people to understand, you know, like if we walk through a prototype based on these insights, like how reasonable is that? And it wasn't 100%. Like I think that we of course then got feedback about things that we thought, oh yeah, maybe that's not as important, once we actually rolled out, and then we started to focus and prioritize and build those things. So again, this is an example of like surveys and concept testing will get you only so far, but then you actually need to sometimes launch something and get live feedback from people as well.
I'm going to throw in a question because it's related and it comes up with some of our students as they're working through their capstone projects. But what happens when, you know, the team's rolling with an insight or multiple insights and they're like, no, we feel good. And then you get into validation stage and then things just like are complete opposite. Like how does the team adjust for that?
Yeah, that is it. It definitely happens. I feel like sometimes something in abstract makes sense. And then when you actually get closer to building it or people start to use it, you realize like, whoa, this is not actually the like working the way that we thought it would, or like it turns out that like creating this thing actually like opened a whole box of other things that we need to think about. So yeah, I think we try to be flexible generally and understand, like we actually build a lot of buffer generally into the timelines on which we're working, because we know that especially with like goal management, it is very complex and there's always going to be something that we think is going to be very straightforward. And then, 2 weeks turns into like a month, and that's like the nature of the work. So yeah, I would definitely say that part of it is making sure to build in buffer time, and to also not hold super duper strongly to your beliefs. Like hold the insights that you have, and you might have to prioritize like who is giving the feedback that maybe this insight isn't valid anymore, because there could be a discord between the like people you talked to and your actual target. Like those could be different, so I think it's really making sure that you're also questioning like who was giving the insights as well.
Absolutely. All right, so next one is specifically about the goals feature. Question and statement. It seems like the adoption of the goals feature, especially in a B2B setting, might take time because it could require clients to make a good amount of process change, onboarding, etc. How did you set goals for adoption of this feature, taking these factors into account? Really good question.
Yeah. So we definitely are looking at timescales that are not going to be the same as like, I don't know, like a social media platform, for example. Like we have learned that goal management happens at annual cadences. It happens at half year and quarterly cadences. So we are generally looking at timescales that are around there, like 3 months and a year especially. And we're still, working on figuring out like what are the trends over time, because we've only been live for a little over a year at this point. So this is like the first time where we can actually start really deeply analyzing like, okay, we've seen 1 year. Now let's like look at the second year and see what that looks like and how much we can actually kind of start to map out proper trends. Yeah. Great question.
And if you have a killer ops team like Design Lab does, you can make it happen in like 3 months. So
hey, yeah, change management is huge. We do a lot of communication with people who are working in operations at companies. Like we try to make sure that we're actually staying in contact with people to help them understand like the products that we're releasing and the changes that we're releasing. And, we also are, getting feedback from people as often as we can to make sure that it's easier on them when we're releasing these things. We have a really good relationship with a lot of folks who use Asana, and it's really great to get feedback directly from people who are helping their organizations scale on the product.
Totally. All right. So this one may be a personal-ish question, but what is your method to prioritize work?
Yeah. Ooh, that is so, I love, this is definitely something I love to talk about. I actually last year wrote a little bit about setting expectations, like around the time that I was working on this product, just to kind of get a high level explanation out there of the way that I think about prioritization. Essentially, like the way I try to think about it is there's a couple of questions that I feel like project managers have probably written about for days, but I try to think about like, what is going to provide the biggest customer impact? And then when it comes to estimating my work, I try to think about like, what is the riskiest, like how risky is this thing? And like, how complex is it? And I feel like there's like an intersection of those things in terms of like working on the highest impact. You want to balance out like the complexity. Like sometimes you just have to do the thing that is going to be really complicated and very risky. And it's going to take you like 2 months and you got to do it. But yeah, I really try to make sure that I'm prioritizing the highest customer impact. And then sometimes I'm also trying to negotiate with my PM and my engineering partners for some extra time to make sure that I'm actually building in like buffer to do some of the more like, these are going to make me feel good and proud as a designer kinds of things. So I think it's really a negotiation process that we as designers have to have, because the reality of our jobs often is that we are essentially at this tension point between like building quickly and like making sure that we're designing experiences that make us feel proud of the work. And like, when you're working at a company, like you have a certain amount of time generally that you want to ship things within, because that's how it works. It's a business. So yeah, I think like what I really try to do is focus on those high impact customer experiences, but then negotiate and say, like, let's make sure that we're also putting in time to make the tweaks where we like reduce the spacing between this thing by 5 pixels, or, like, I think it just also makes engineers prouder of their work too. And like, ultimately, when you have an experience that looks and feels really good, everybody benefits from it.
Yep, it's all about setting the right expectations across the board, right? Even with yourself. I think sometimes we forget that, is to actually set expectations with ourselves.
Yeah, I'm not always the greatest at estimating how long things are going to take. Like, I don't know if anyone is, but yeah, I've gotten really good at like, doubling how long I think it's going to take, because, you're going to have to talk to other people. You're going to have to go to design crit. You might have a review. Like, every company has like a process that designers are going to have to go through. So I think that also needs to be part of that prioritization that you're doing, is just like, okay, well, if I spend this time on this tweak, like, what else could be happening? And like, what are all the steps that I might have to go through to actually, run this by design systems, et cetera.
It's always a chain of events, right? All right, next one is, how do you manage new ideas that come to you or the team after the ideation phase, especially the ideas that would cause the team to stray away from the current path?
Yeah, good one. I think that is why it is important to have goals in general. I feel like the reason that we're building this product is to help people avoid situations like that where they can't express what their priorities are. So if your team is able to actually make clear what your priorities are at like an objective, like we are trying to achieve this thing level, then when people come to you and say, well, like, why don't you work on this thing? Then you are able to then say, well, we could. However, like, is this thing more important or less important than important thing we said we were going to do? And that for me is the way that I usually do it. I usually say, like, we'll put it in the backlog. We really appreciate your feedback. Right now, we're really focused on this thing. If we have time as we're building this out, then we will do our best to incorporate that. But the reality is that right now we need to put all of our energy, or most of our energy, into important objective that we all agreed on. And, like, maybe in September, or like maybe in the future. And then just make sure that you actually do put that somewhere. So I have a goals design like project that I work in, and I have a bunch of like, I want to do this one day type stuff. And, if I have a free week or like a free couple of hours or something where I'm not thinking about actually shipping a project, then that's where I usually pull that stuff in.
Definitely. And it definitely does not sound like it's any different working at a larger company that has the same conversations as you would with a one-on-one client, where they say, but you can just do that one change, right? You're like, but we could. But what do you want?
Right. Like, would you rather this or that? Because like, ultimately, it can't do both. Like, it is really, I love getting other people to prioritize things that they're asking for on my behalf. Like, I just feel like it makes the conversation easier. And I think as a designer, like, a lot of times our job is just communicating, like, yeah, I could spend time going blue sky on this new idea, or do you want me to finish this in the next 3 days? Because I can't do both, because I'm not working until like 10 p.m. Like, I think also as a designer, expressing your boundaries is really important.
1000%. All right. So the next upvoted question is, what are your top 2 book recommendations that you feel are the most close to practical side of the job as a UX designer?
Gosh. Okay. So the one I love to always recommend to people is the User Experience Team of One. It is a classic, and it is one of the books that I read when I was newer at product design, transitioning from graphic to product design. So I'm always going to recommend that book. I also really like Design for Real Life. It is by somebody that I've had the pleasure of knowing, who is Sarah Wachter-Becher, and she's very, very smart. And like, I just think it's really important as designers that we're not just, thinking about like the optimistic side of things, but that we're actually considering how some of our experiences can lead to harm if we're not actually, considering where things could go wrong. So I really appreciate that people are talking more about that, and I highly recommend that book.
Amazing. All right. So these questions are all over the place, but you guys are asking amazing questions. All
I
right.
love
Next one
this.
is, can you talk more about the double diamond process for the pain points?
Ooh.
What was the original hypothesis? What were the pain points that were surfaced? How did you narrow down the pain points? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, the original hypothesis was like, we need goal management because we know that people do work for a reason. And so we will build goals. And I think through the process of actually doing the discovery research, that's where we figured out like, oh, yes, people do want goal management. But beyond that, there's like this deep, like conceptual, like meta problem that like, and like goal management requires all of these relationships between people. And we now have to figure out how to build that in a product. And we have to figure out like, what is a goal? How does it connect to everything? And so I think that's like where we realize like, oh, scope big, scope very, very big. And so, yeah, it went from like build goals to like goal management is a vortex. And then from there, that's when we started to like actually narrow it down. So that was the first diamond. And then the second diamond was like, okay, we could do all of these things. And that's when we did the concept testing. And that was very helpful for figuring out like what specifically we should do. And then beyond that, that's when it was all the tiny, tiny little diamonds where it was like, okay, now that we know what we have to do at like a huge double diamond level, like what do we actually get to deliver to customers? And that's where we figured out like, okay, this feature should look like this feature should look like this. And like, that was the part I think that took a lot of time and prioritization and like a lot of iteration.
I think the one thing that comes to mind as you're talking through this is that I feel like a lot of times goals are always set through like an HR platform, right? So it always is seen as like something that's tied to a review. And I'm thinking through how Design Lab uses goals now, and a lot of it is for transparency and just for everyone to be in alignment. But were there any, I guess, concerns over people asking like, well, how is this different than just managing it through like HR software?
For sure. Yeah. We had to think a lot about like the types of goals that we want to support. So there are personal professional goals, and then there's like team, like we want to work on these things goals. And we do imagine that right now there's like a use for HR goals, right? But like generally, I think we are currently saying, you know, like if you as an individual want to use Asana's goals, like you could Asana goals, you can do that. But like Asana goals is definitely like best built for like your team to collaborate and coordinate and figure out like what goals actually are going to contribute to that company's mission and like what that company wants to achieve within a certain amount of time. So yeah, we had a lot of conversations that were just around like, what types of goals do we even support? Like how many types of goals are there? And the answer is a lot. Yeah.
All right, so let's transition to some more personal questions for the last few minutes. But this next one is, can you talk more about how you transitioned from graphic design to product design? Vivian is also a graphic designer and is trying to do the same. So any advice or tips for her?
Yeah. Gosh. So it's been a while at this point, but yeah, my history is that I went to the School of Visual Arts for graphic design. Before that, I was like really into fine arts, and I was making like t-shirts. I was making like, you know, like notebooks and stuff like that. Generally what I did is I learned a little bit about programming, and then I realized that like the difference between a graphic designer and like someone who was doing more like interaction design was that there were like a lot more states, and like there was a lot more like reasoning that you had to think through. Like communication design, you have to think about like, does the poster communicate the thing that we want people to know? But then I think it's just like a whole different scale with like digital user experience design, where there's a lot more talking to people and a lot less like there's color theory, and there's like some things that are more like measurement based or scientific. But I feel like the shift that I had to realize was like, you can't just do an art school level rationale for the decisions that you're making. And like, if you've been to graphic design art school, you know what I'm talking about. You really have to have like a reason for the decisions that you're making, like 90% of the times. And then sometimes there are situations where everything looks good. You could choose any of these 5 designs and it would be fine. And you got to just pick one. So like, I think that's the interesting thing that I had to kind of move back and forth between is like moving from like having a rationale for everything and realizing that sometimes there will still be that feelings-based experience. But in general, I recommend the books that I read, like really just trying to get the UX fundamentals down in terms of like trying to build as much experience as you can speaking with customers and understanding where they're coming from. Your skills are going to come so in handy because you're going to be able to do journey maps and like all kinds of artifacts that people are going to love. But yeah, really getting good at understanding the difference between a single static visual, which is what a lot of graphic designers are used to doing, and like building an interactive experience and just understanding that like you can click things, you can hover on things, like things can make sound, like you have so many options, and you just have to remember that you don't have to stop at like button, you know. It's so much more than that. And just like really thinking about the holistic experience, I think is the thing that I had to learn.
That definitely sounds like a conversation I always have with a lot of our newer students who are like, wait, I don't just put a rectangle on a page and it just doesn't work like that. So that's amazing that you brought that up. All right, last question, also about you. This one's from Wilma. So how do you showcase your passion about product design and how does it come out in your work? I love that question.
This is so cool. Yeah. I mean, I definitely, if you're excited about it, I encourage you to also speak. So that's one thing that I definitely do is I try to make sure that I'm doing public speaking. I think when it comes to working with folks or like when I've been doing, you know, like doing interview loops and things like that, where I'm trying to get roles, like I think it comes out through talking about the parts of the process that are most exciting for me. So, you know, I was talking about how I love collaborating with different people. I love speaking to people and learning about their stories, things like that. Like, I think it's really important to ask yourself what the parts of the process that you find that you are most, that are most engaging to you, because that's going to help you understand how to display your passion. Like you can't just say, or you could, you know, but like, I love product design. Like which part, you know, do you like the most about it is the thing that I think people are going to want to know. So I really try to lean into that. All of the talks I do generally are about like storytelling, like here's how I did this thing. And like, here was the thing that I learned. And I really like teaching people. So that's another example of, you know, me relating a part of myself that feels really tangible. Yeah, when it comes to my team, I try to just make sure that other people know what I'm working on and like where I'm at. And I try to share, you know, like, ooh, I just like made this tweak to this thing and now it feels really good. And I show that at stand-up sometimes. And, you know, like sometimes I get some little claps and people are like, wow, like, thanks for sharing this thing with me. But yeah, like, I really think that if you are excited about the work that you're doing, you have an opportunity to get people that you're working with excited too by showing them those parts that make you feel really happy.
All right, and this last one's from me, and this is mainly because it's related to what you just said about, you know, just kind of putting yourself out there, you know, learning how to be confident in speaking about what you've been working on, specifically the parts. What's your advice on imposter syndrome? And have you gotten over it yet?
Oh, that's never going to happen. I feel like the more you know you don't know. And I feel like what happens for me personally is that I have a cycle where I'm like, yeah, I can do this. No. Yeah, everything's going to be fine. Like I saw that I could do it that time that I thought I couldn't. And like, I just feel like confidence is something that I will be eternally working on. What I do know is that I am very confident in the things that I know that I can do. And when I encounter something that I feel like is challenging, that I haven't built confidence yet, I think that's when I feel the like imposter syndrome type thing. I will also say that like being a Black woman means that like there's a whole other layer of just like that experience and like the systemic messaging that I have encountered. And I like tweeted about this the other day and it just like went somewhere I did not fully expect in terms of just like, there will be moments where it's not really imposter syndrome. And it's like, people are actively thinking that you're like entitled or like don't deserve to be there yet, or just aren't at the right time. And like, I just want to make sure that people know there's like two separate things. I think when it comes to your internal confidence, you just got to work on like remembering that you are a capable person and look back at examples of you being able to do it. But when it comes to other people, like you just got to work around that stuff a lot of the time. And like, I am so happy if anyone wants to ever like have conversations about that stuff. I will gladly talk to you about ways to get around that by like building allies, etc. But yeah, honestly, like sharing the work that you're doing and like keeping track of the work that you're doing is one way that I really, really combat those feelings when I have moments where I'm just like, why am I here? I am not capable, but I am, it's a thing that everyone goes through.
I love that. Thank you so much for answering that. And thank you, Wilma, for asking that question. And we are at time, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Catt, again. This was incredible. I may likely email you soon because I love some of the topics you just brought up, and maybe we can have more of a fireside chat with the group. So that would be awesome. But yeah, everyone, thank you so much for being here. I am popping our YouTube and all of our social media stuff. So follow us, follow Asana. Things are really fun on social media. We share all the stories. So yeah, let us know how you like this presentation, and we will pass on the feedback to Catt and Team Asana. But again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Catt. Thank you, Leah, for being in the chat, manning that portion as well. We're really excited for this, but hopefully we get to do more in the future. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Like I said, this is recorded. You should get this in your email. If not, this is going to be up on YouTube in a little bit. So yeah, check all those out. Give us a follow, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and have a really good Wednesday and the rest of your week. Cool.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.